All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Um, Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the latest Open Mic Insights webinar with Kochava Foundry. The topic today is on measuring incrementality and lift. My name is Kimberly Manning. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Kochava. And I just want to familiarize you with the format that we're using here, the platform. If you look to the right of your screen, you're going to see some tabs over there. The first is the chat. Our community manager is Leslie Amadio today. She's going to welcome you there. And I encourage you to say hello, let us know where you're joining us from, and please feel free to be active in that chat. If you would like to submit questions, this is intentionally an interactive format for this webinar, and the whole point is to answer your questions. So please do, at any time, submit questions. To do that, jump over to the Q&A tab, which is on the far side of that list. There are some questions that were submitted ahead of time that Grant is going to show on the slides as well. So we've already got some in place. If you submitted them, thank you for doing that. And for everyone else, please go ahead. Even anytime you can just submit questions, we will bring them up when the time is available and put them up on screen. We also have a couple of other tabs over there. One is polls, and we are going to have some live polls throughout the webinar today. Grant is going to be letting you know when those are open, and we encourage you to participate in those. It's always fun to see what kind of answers we get from the audience. And then the last thing I want to mention is there's a docs tab. We have, I think, 5 different resources there today for you. 6, actually. And if you have additional questions, sometimes those can really answer some of them for you or give you additional information on a topic that Grant is covering today. So I want to just encourage you to take a look at all of those. We usually have questions about, will this webinar be recorded? The answer is yes, it will. And typically within 24 hours, you'll receive a link to that recording. That link will also take you back to the docs as well if there's anything you wanted to download that you didn't get a chance to. So I think that covers my housekeeping items today. We're super glad that you all are joining us. Really fun to see people kind of dropping in right now. Looks like those numbers are still climbing, but we're at 10:02, and we like to be prompt and we like to be respectful of your time. So at this time, I would love to introduce Grant Simmons, who is the VP of Kochava Foundry. Kochava Foundry is the strategic consulting arm of Kochava. And so what we do there is for those who have very specific analyses that they need to do, bespoke problems they need to solve, Grant and his rockstar team love solving problems like that and do that for our customers all the time. But what's great about these webinars is the opportunity without an appointment to ask Grant questions and learn from him. So we just welcome you, and I want to just introduce Grant and turn it over to him at this time.
Thanks, Kimberly. I appreciate it. And it's fun seeing where all these folks are coming in from. I think the furthest one I saw was probably Amsterdam, but we've got folks from all over. So really appreciate. Oh, we got somebody from Turkey. I absolutely love this. So what I'm going to try to do is keep this entertaining, and so you don't all fall asleep at your computers. So actually, you know, we're going to start off with a poll here real quick. And I want to sort of get a sense of where people are with where you are with lift testing and incrementality testing. And so you've got a poll up on your screen right now. And today I'm going to walk through a few different things. I'm going to start with sort of the theory of lift testing. And so we're going to go through some examples, and we're going to go through how folks have historically done it. And then we'll look at, well, how is it slightly different for publishers versus advertisers? We have different objectives. We have different incentives. And so what are sort of some of the different tooling that's different within both the publisher and the advertiser spectrum? And then finally, we'll talk about what we're doing here at Kochava about it and what we're doing specifically in Foundry. And then finally, like Kimberly mentioned, we'll finish up with the questions we already received. But then again, you know, ask questions as we go through this thing. There's going to be plenty of opportunity. We're going to have some more polls as we go through. But yeah, please ask away. So it looks like we got a pretty even split here. Not, you know, statistically significant. Is this in the ballpark? Probably, in terms of the folks that you're at an incremental lift webinar, you're probably doing some sort of incremental lift testing. So this is pretty reasonable. We'll talk about the timing of when do you and when should you and how often should you run incremental tests. But it's good to see that at least most folks are like, we don't run it. Everybody here is at least doing something. So with that, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to jump in. So the other thing I'll mention is I strongly encourage folks to ask questions. If you go to kochava.com/foundry and scroll down to the content section, you'll see what we did in the last webinar, which was largely around sort of the signal deprecation, largely on the back of iOS, and what's happening with ATT and the SCAD network relative to attribution and measurement. And so you guys submitted a lot of questions. We took a lot of time to answer those questions, and all the answers to those questions are out there. So again, I encourage you to do the same thing here. Ask away, and even if we don't answer it in the webinar, we'll make sure that those questions get answered in a written form so that you guys get answered. So with that, let's jump into incrementality and lift, which is what I'm going to go through today is largely through the lens of mobile performance and digital media, but it extends to advertising of all types. And I think you'll be able to wrap your head around some thought exercises that we're going to start with mobile, but they extend outward. So let's say that you're the user acquisition manager for a gaming company, and you run a campaign over, let's say, 6 weeks that's targeting the acquisition of new users, and you spent $50,000 on this campaign. You ultimately attributed it back to 30,000 responders to that campaign who downloaded your app. Was this a good campaign, right? Most folks will typically take your $50,000, divide it into your 30,000 respondents. It's $1.60 CPI. Yeah, it's typically a good campaign, but was it a success? Maybe, right? The question that incrementality tries to answer is, at least in my perspective, is in absence of an ad, what would have happened? How many people would have purchased anyway? How many people would have gotten to that level complete? How many people would have watched that video, etc.? But in absence of an ad, can you capture that baseline? And so if we go back, at least, and not to age myself, but I've been doing testing like this for, at this point, decades. And we can go back to catalog marketing as sort of a thought exercise here. And so catalogers, right, they have to be very, very careful about their ad spend, because we live in a world of digital CPMs in like the $5 to $25 range. Print CPMs are like $700, right? When you take in the print costs and the paperweight cost and the mail cost and the merge purge cost, and the encumbered rate is pretty expensive. So you have to be really smart about it. And so typically what most catalogers would do, and what most specialty retailers would do, is you would collect your entire house file. Give me everybody who's ever purchased from me previously. And we're going to start cutting them into groups. And so for instance, we'll take everybody who purchased from us in the last 12 months off our house file, right? Folks who have purchased from us previously. And we will mail 90% of them, and we're going to hold back 10% of them. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the folks who purchased from us 13 to 24 months ago, and then everybody who purchased from us a long time ago, 25 months plus. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take those best customers of mine, and I'm going to hand it to some data companies, some co-ops like Epsilon or Datalogix and Oracle Data Cloud, places like that, to say, hey, go build a lookalike audience of folks I can mail catalogs to try to get new customers. And so that's that true prospecting. That fits most closely to sort of mobile user acquisition, is that last little line there, which is prospecting. That's the effort to get new customers. And so when you mail these all these catalogs, you take in aggregate the folks who I mailed did how much per household. The folks who were in my holdout group did how much per household. A divided by B minus 1 gives you your variance. And so what we see is, for the folks who were pretty active against our brand, they've ordered from us in the last 12 months. Well, 70% of those customers were going to purchase even if you didn't send them a catalog, right? 30% did it because you sent them a catalog. If we go down, we can see that incrementality starts to increase, right? meaning folks are less active. They have to be potentially treated with more media to get them to do things. And then finally, we get down to that last bucket there, which is co-op true prospecting, which is user acquisition, new customer acquisition. Even though these are ostensibly new customers, we still see that 27% of that population was going to purchase against the brand anyway. And so this is how it's been done historically in catalog, and it's trustworthy. It's been around for decades, but it's a little challenging in digital. And why is that? Well, for a few different reasons, and I'm going to come back to this one later. But if we think about how we understand incrementality historically, it's you start with a holdout group, and then you carve off a chunk of that holdout group and you do one of two things with them. Either you literally put them on the shelf and don't give them any media treatment, or you potentially treat them with a public service ad or a potential serve time holdout, right? So in that case, the customer will actually receive an impression. It just won't be the brand impression. And so this is pretty well understood historically. You create a control group, select randomly. You isolate that control group, literally set them on the shelf. You run your media, and then you compare your performance. Holdout group. Super straightforward in the context of a direct mail campaign. However, in digital, you start to enter this notion of infinite versus limited capacity. What is that? When I walk through the direct mail exercise, there is such an industry baked around that if I have 5 million names that I want to have actually receive a piece of direct mail, I can send them to third-party companies who will run through all of the possible changes of address, who will do the merge and purge, all of the name change stuff, such that the 5 million names that I get back, once I mail them, 99% of those catalogs get delivered. And even if I walk to my mailbox and I pick up that Victoria's Secret catalog and I go, oh, that's not for me, and I throw it in the trash can, that impression has still been met, meaning the throughput was still 100%. And the reason direct mail cares about it so much is about that CPM cost, right? They have to get that throughput. However, that doesn't exist in digital. If I were to define 5 million IP addresses or mobile ad IDs or email addresses, assuming that you could address email addresses, or any other sort of identifier, and I were to hand them to a DSP, an email provider, or anybody, how many of those are going to get delivered? The answer is not all of them. In fact, probably not even half. Why? The notion of limited capacity in digital is largely affected by, you can think about RTB, right? Did you bid enough to win their eyeballs? When you go to, let's say, yahoo.com, you see one banner, well, there's 5,000 behind it trying to win your eyeballs, right? Did you bid enough? Was the customer online who was in the target group? Are they online frequently enough? Are they on at the right time of day? Is it a super competitive marketplace where you're not bidding enough that you can actually win those? And so at the end of the day, you have some problems with holdout groups. There's lots of reasons why people won't get a digital ad. And so as you go into the test with your predefined group, let's say, again, we'll use the example of 5 million customers. And we could wave our magic wand and we saw that, 25% of those 5 million customers are gaming aficionados. And 50% of that universe has demonstrated in-app purchase activity. And 25% of them are tablet users, right? So this is the sort of information that you can have. And so then when you run your media, when you see who actually receives ads, it starts to look, hello. Let me wait for the thing to catch up. Here we go. We'll see that the audience who actually received ads looks different from the control. And so if we see not who we intended to treat with ads, but who actually received ads, well, 60% were gaming aficionados, only 30% had in-app purchase activity, and only 10% were iPad users. Well, in this case, your test doesn't look like your control. And so if you observe differences in these two populations, once media has been run, is it due to audience differences or is it due to media? And unfortunately, you don't know. So at the end of the day, there's a bias control involved, typically within holdouts in digital. And so let's get on to a little bit more definitional work here real quick. And so let's define the groups we're talking about here. Let's talk about some different populations. There's this notion of an overall target eligible. This is the overall universe that you could possibly market to. Within that, we have two groups. Those who we are trying to treat with ads and those who are in our holdout group, right? And we can further subset this. Within that, folks who you're trying to treat with ads, the ad eligible population, that gets subset into who you could actually reach with ads and who you tried to reach with ads, but you couldn't. And then finally, your holdout, assuming you run a PSA or a serve time or something like that, it has the sort of same problem, right? Or same issue. Meaning you're going to try to treat everybody with a PSA, but you're only going to reach some. You're going to try to reach everybody with a brand ad, but you're only going to reach some. And so you end up having what I call the pill, or these four sort of subset groups. And so if we look at the different types of measurements that are typically in market right now, there's this notion of a pre-campaign holdout. This is the first exercise we started with. Start with your entire universe. We're going to say 80% is going to get the media treatment, 20% we're going to hold out. We're going to run our media, and then we're going to look at the performance of all of that ad eligible group, whether they got media or not, right? And we're going to compare that against the holdout population. This is a valid comparison because in aggregate, A plus B, the folks who you tried to reach with media and reach, folks who you tried to reach with media and you didn't, in aggregate, that will look like your control group. However, the problem is lift is only coming from the exposed group side. So at best, you're getting a watered down result. The other issue is, given sort of the dynamics of bid algorithms and how competitive the ecosystem is, it's reasonable that the group who you tried to reach with media and couldn't actually converts at a higher rate than those who you could. And so that can become a real confounding measurement when you have an unexposed group that is converting higher than your media treatment group, right? And so typically, this tends to be a noisy measurement, and realize that there's real opportunity cost. You could have marketed to the entire target eligible population. You knowingly decided to put a chunk on the shelf, and then the comparisons we can make between there, they're a little loose. So that's the pre-campaign holdout. Let's go on to the next type here real quick, serve time. So this is notions of like a public service announcement, or it could be at the ad server algorithm, right? Either way, sort of the watchword of caution here is the server algorithm needs to be modified. If for nothing else, optimization has to be turned off. What am I talking about? If you have a brand ad with an expected engagement profile, like click through to install the app, and you serve that against a donate blood at, let's say, Red Cross, we would expect this ad to be interacted with. We wouldn't necessarily expect this ad to be interacted with. And so if optimization is left on, this one will start to drift towards an audience that's more likely to engage, and this one won't. And so your audiences themselves will start to drift in serve time holdouts, meaning your audiences won't look alike again. Separately from that is within serve time holdouts, an enrollment decision has to be made. Am I in a control group or am I in the test group? And that lookup and maintenance has to be done every time that same customer is seen. And so, you know, the probably about a dozen or so times where we've gotten our hands on the data of that serve time raw data of who was in the serve time audience, oftentimes we see there's huge, massive bleed over into, those customers actually saw the brand ad at a pretty high rate. And so then you've got some real bad decisions to make. You either have to start throwing out universe, not great because now you're running into statistically significant issues, or you can, in statistical terms, censor the universe. You can all make it look like the same thing, which isn't really reality. Or you can try to remodel that group, which is you're now sort of in a modeling exercise. But the one sort of, my biggest watchword of caution around serve time is that notion of optimization is it sort of has to run through a dumb ad server if you want to create an actual test. And in that case, I'd also ask, what are you really testing, right? You're literally just testing creative treatment, not optimization, not anything that the DSP might have in their wheelhouse that could actually help you. So serve time holdouts can be real problematic, either a PSA or a true ad server algorithm. Here's the one that makes me the saddest, because this is the one that's sold the most. And it's also the one that's likely the most wrong, which is, hey, let's take who received our ads, not who we tried to serve our ads to and who actually received them, but who actually just got the ads. And let's compare that to our overall holdout population. This is often requested as a exposed versus holdout campaign, oftentimes executed by the publisher themselves. And it is also the one with the strongest likelihood of bias. This one will usually be wrong. So again, why is that? It's because who you tried to serve ads to and who you could ultimately reach are two different populations. And so if we sort of break this down into what can and can't be compared within holdouts, we can ask the question, how likely is it the two populations will match? And so if we think about just a pure holdout, all right, we have an overall ad target population, some of whom we're going to reach, some of whom we're not, versus a holdout. And the point to this is your exposed will not look like your unexposed group in terms of customer makeup, affinity, what they're into, customer behavior. They won't look alike. Your exposed group won't look like your holdout either. The only one that will look alike is if you glue together who you intended to treat versus your overall holdout. But again, that's problematic, especially when that conversion rate might be higher in the unexposed group because of who you could reach with ads. And then you can again compare that to a PSA. You run a PSA to control for that exposure bias, right? And so if you have an exposed universe on both the control side and the test side, theoretically you've removed that bias, but again, you're in the problems of a PSA will not optimize to better or more engaged customers. A brand ad typically will. And if you want an actual measurement, you have to turn off optimization and amend your ad server algorithm. So holdouts are a little problematic. I want to stop here. Let's stop here, Kimberly, real quick. I haven't checked to see if we have any questions coming in.
Well,
this is a good pausing point.
Yeah, that's great. So there was a comment from Brandon Ward on the top, that last point that you just made.
Yeah.
He said, very interesting point on turning off the optimization. I'd never considered that for a PSA test, which makes me think that may be kind of a light bulb for multiple people on if you want to speak to that a bit more.
Yeah, we could spend a couple hours on, here's what I'll say for the cheap seats. It's all wrong to some extent, right? It's just a limit of how wrong. And typically when I look at, and we'll go back to the serve time hold here real quick, this is so problematic for so many reasons. And it comes into having to check it after the fact to mitigate bias risk, which is, a complicated way of saying, the control that you thought was your control actually isn't representative of random. And so you end up having to do curation, you end up having to do rebalancing, you end up having sample size limitations. I would also ask anybody who's been provided with a lot of serve time holdout results, are they all positive all the time? Probably. They probably all look pretty good. They probably all look pretty good in the positive range. And just, I was head of retail analytics at Oracle for a long time, and run just thousands of lift measurements. And I have to hand it to those folks. This is where specifically a guy named Robin Opie, who was the chief analytics officer at what was Oracle Data Cloud. We would solicit lots and lots of that raw data of serve time and global holdouts and things like that. And ultimately, they're all wrong to some extent. And so this is a good segue into, well, what do you do about it? Oh, yeah. Hey, Zach's bringing up the notion of geo-based holdouts. It's one I don't get into here historically, and it might be known as like sister market testing. When I was on the brand side and retail, we used to do a lot of this where we would absolutely surge a DMA or a series of DMAs, and we would go dark in another. And we would do a lot of modeling work to understand what sister markets tend to move in concert with each other so that we had a universe of markets we could test against a pretty good market control. It needs a lot of data to do it. If the system market testing is pretty solid, understand that there is a pretty significant opportunity cost there. You do have to surge a market, and you typically have to go dark in another, which again doesn't represent reality, but a lot of this does get into the cost of testing.
I think that's it for now, Grant, if you want to continue.
Yeah, I'm going to pop the second poll question here real quick. And I'm curious about this. Let me stop sharing. And because everybody here said that they knew a little bit about lift testing, I'm going to pop this one. Which is, of all the things you're trying to incrementally test, what's been hardest? Is it like the SANs like Google, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, where you don't really get a lot of ad signal? Is it just raw display and open web? Is it video? Is it video on CTV? So to the extent that we have sort of enough questions here, please fill this guy out. As you guys are looking at this and voting on it, where we're going to go now is well, what's Kochava doing about it? And I think in order to answer that question, we have to look at this a little bit different from the advertiser versus the publisher lens. Is this rendering, or is nobody voting?
Well, it's interesting. I'm looking. So if you look in the polls tab, there we go. Maybe it was just delayed.
All right.
Yeah. So to everyone here participating, if you jump into the polls tab, this is poll number 3. I'm not exactly sure how it shows up for you, but obviously there's votes coming in, so you are able to see it, which is great.
Yeah, social media seems to sort of be up there right now. Connected TV, yep. So we get into sort of a lot of like what signals are available to bridge from the living room device to the couch sitter. Yep. It's a bummer that social media is so hard to measure incrementally. We'll talk about that one here in a little bit. No, it's good. Cool. All right. Let's go back to Sharon here real quick. All right, and so I just mentioned that lift and incrementality, there's really sort of 2 parties involved. There's the publisher and the advertiser, right? And what each values is a little bit different, and what each is looking for is a little bit different. And so if we think about the advertiser, they want to know across their publisher suite contribution. They want to know overlap. They want to know influence. And they want to ultimately optimize to the highest conversions by a publisher level. So incrementality for them is largely a campaign view relative to other campaigns, right? If we think about what a publisher is looking for, is they would like to account for every impression they serve. They're looking for effective measurement for ads while respecting privacy constraints. This is sort of a big deal in CTV. We'll unpack that here in a sec. And they need to ideally do this optimization exercise I talked about, meaning if they could score their ad signal on an ongoing basis, they can optimize towards more conversions, right? And so they need to demonstrate their value to the advertiser. They need to maximize the reach of each ad impression, and they need to stay relevant in the advertiser's eyes. So the incentives and the paradigms are a little bit different here. And so in terms of what we built at Kochava, we can measure mobile app activity. That's what we talked about sort of largely in what we started this whole thing with. That extends to website. We can also do store footfall and visitation, as well as in agreement with Affinity Data Solutions to be able to do, so think like grocery sales. This notion of episodic tune-in is pretty big in media and entertainment. So actual viewership of consumption events in media and entertainment brands. And then finally, we're tied into political donations right now. So in case anybody hadn't noticed, it's an election year, and there's going to be a lot of political dollars flying around. We have some ways to sort of close the loop on that, largely around donation measurement. So these are the outcomes we measure. How do we do it? We have a few different methodologies. And each of these methodologies largely come down to what signals are available. And so the first one that I want to start with, and I consider this our flagship offering, is Media Lift. And so I mentioned briefly my time as a head of retail analytics at Datalogix and then with Oracle. And this solution fits closest to Oracle's iMeasure solution or Nielsen's IRI solution, if anybody's familiar with those. But what this is a synthetic control. So we talked a lot about upfront controls earlier. This is a modeled control using a huge database of consented data, largely first-party data. That is sort of the critical thing that makes this hum. But effectively what we do is we collect the devices that we see as having had an opportunity to be exposed. We look at the associated devices in the household. And then from that, we build a matched or synthetic control. And so from a privacy standpoint, it's a very privacy-friendly measurement in that none of this will ever foot back to a device because everything is modeled and aggregated. Lots of granularity in this. You get lift by frequency, you get lift by creative, lift by campaign. We can look at multiple post-install events. We can point at this at footfall. We can do this against out-of-home, CTV, and on-device DSPs. Really, really deep learning. This isn't an always-on solution, though. This is a campaign measurement after the fact with deep results. And so historically, most of these have been provided to publishers to try to understand their own sort of publisher benefit. We do these for advertisers as well. There's a one-sheeter over there you can click through. It's over in the docs section that gets into Media Lift a little bit more. The biggest benefit to this and the one takeaway is there's no opportunity cost here, meaning there's no universe of folks who you're saying, man, we'd like to market to them, but we're going to put them in a holdout group. This one says, run your media full bore, and we're going to construct a control group after the fact. Pretty complicated, needs a lot of back data to be able to help create that model, and typically delivered about 10 days after the media is run. If we look at sort of a more simple version, actually, let's look at an output of this here real quick. So this is a Media Lift that was run on CTV. And so we're looking at media that was run in a CTV or cable environment where we were able to collect the associated devices. And then we look at app session lift, app install lift separately on Roku. And then finally, all of this media was meant to drive demand for a much beloved relaunch of a sitcom we all know the name of. And it was coming back after 20 years, and it was coming back after 20 years in the app. And so the question was, could you measure the episodic tune-in lift here? And so it was 34%. That's a pretty big lift number. What does that mean? It means that for every 100 folks that you treated with media, well, 66 of them were going to watch the program anyway. 34 of them did it because you treated them with media. And so again, it's a little rich, but we can repeat this again and again. And so it's strongly directional. I believe in this as a solution. Again, a little more complicated. If we look at a sort of less complicated version, there's this notion of regression, discontinuity, and time, which is a very complicated way to say time series. Now, the good news is this is one that most folks can do themselves. Most folks can do this themselves because they have the two signals required to do it. What was the ad serve time, and what is my conversion timestamp? So if I have distinct timestamps on my attributable media, could be impressions or clicks, and I have attributable timestamps on my conversion activity, well, I can set all of my ad serve time to 0, and I can say, well, if this device or if this customer hadn't received an impression before, at some rate, there's a baseline of activity. At some rate, folks are downloading the app, using the app, opening the app, up until ad serve time. And then suddenly, this first spike, this first 15-minute bin goes boom, way off the page. And then you get into sort of these fractal repeats. And so what we do is we run it 7 days forward, 7 days back, and basically wrap the curve over on itself, and everything that nets out above 0, we consider contribution. And so again, Is this 100% right? Nope, but this is very, very repeatable, and it can be repeated every day. And if you repeat it against all your networks, you start to get comparable inflection curves in terms of performance. And so it's sort of a nice little one-size-fits-all quick check in terms of incrementality of, hey, who's giving me my biggest pops? The good news on this guy is you can point it at your self-attributing networks like Snapchat, TikTok, Meta, stuff like that. The next one is a publisher view. So I had talked about the publisher and advertiser incentives here a little bit. Kochava's built the notion of publisher suite. And I talked about sort of the privacy concerns of some of the, in this case, the OEMs. So think like Roku, Samsung, LG. They understand that they need to be able to present data for the purposes of attribution, but they don't want that data to leak. So we're talking home IP addresses, profile device hardware, hardware IDs, things like that. And so Kochava built a service whereby we can pull all that in a one-way street, we'll never leak it, and we can expose it within our environment for the purposes of attribution. So if, let's say, you're a betting app and you want to run on Roku endemic media, great, we've got a solution for you. And you don't have to be a Kochava customer, you can literally be anybody. And so that's the service we've built, and it's been growing and growing. But as you might imagine, the publishers have asked, hey, we need this notion of lift. We understand attribution. You're reading every single ad that we're serving, and you're letting us know whether that touches a conversion or not. That's an awesome service. Thank you. However, we want to know if it's incremental. And so what we did, and we can get into for anybody who's interested, we can get into the meat of it in a separate meeting. But we basically took regression discontinuity with some elements of media lift, largely the modeling part, and we do a modeling time series regression to have an overall ongoing contribution curve that we can report back to the publisher. So for anybody who's on the call and is curious in an always-on solution from a publisher view, please get in touch. This is a pretty neat service. So everything I've talked about so far largely has to do with ad signals of being available on both the advertiser and the publisher side. But what happens is that starts to go away. And I think that's, see my iOS webinar if you don't think signal's going away, it's going away. And we've already sort of lived in this world for a bit, right? We've all lived in the world of self-attributing networks like Meta and Google and things like that. The good news is there's still some clues available. In the case of, let's say, the self-attributing networks, you do have timestamps. And in the case of pretty much any advertiser who's actually serious about user acquisition, you have cost. And if you have cost at the same grain as your conversions, you've actually got something to work with. And we'll talk about that here in a second. So we purchased a company called Machine here a little bit ago, knowing that signal is largely going away. And this is no big secret. The writing's on the wall largely with scan. And we said, well, is there an opportunity to look at novel inputs to be able to create an incremental or contribution story? And so, again, over in the docs section, I encourage everybody to go over and grab the information on AIM. But what this thing's superpower is it uses cost and conversions, typically cost per day, per partner, per platform, per geo, and then conversions per day, per platform, per geo as well. And it builds this sort of, again, recursive model to say, over the next 7 days, given this level of cost, how many conversions do we expect? And so this thing's super thirsty in terms of back data it needs. It takes a little bit to get stood up. But the goal in this is to build these models. When we build them, we look at that 7-day forward-looking extrapolation, and it's 95% accurate, meaning we've created a system that says at this given level of spend, what's the conversion rate that we expect, or what's the conversions we expect to see downstream? So it could be installs, videos watched, levels completed, hamburgers ordered in apps, or whatever you want. And it says, should I spend more or should I spend less? And so we've completely bypassed ad signal in this case. We use it to train the model a little bit, but the meat of the model is largely based on cost and conversion inputs. This thing's pretty neat. I encourage folks to get in touch. I'm not sure there's any solution that's future-proof out there, but this has the two signals that I would expect advertisers to be able to maintain ongoing, which is how much am I spending and how much, what's my overall conversion record in my shop within my view. And if you have those two things, we can build a model. The last one I'll talk about, we spent a little bit of time talking about SANs, and I want to talk about just sort of mobile performance, and then we'll sort of open it up for questions. And so this is a thought exercise. This is another one that you can run yourself. But what we're looking at is all of the acquisitions that attributed to a single mobile DSP within the month of March, right? And so within the month, there was 53,000 overall install attributions that attributed back to this mobile DSP. And what we do is, because we have the time signals, is we can break it into evenly stratified buckets of time to install time. And time to install is a measurement of the attributed ad signal, impression or click, and then when did the conversion activity happen. And so we see that there was 5,300 installs out of the 53,000 that installed in about 5 minutes at a mean time. And then there was another 5,300 that had a mean time of about 10 minutes, and then 15 minutes, and et cetera, et cetera. And we see that time starts to increase. This blue line is a measure of this 5,300, what percent of this 5,300 installs that happened really, really fast to the media had a purchase event in the next 10 days within the app. And we see that about 17%, 18% of the folks who responded really quickly to media had that quality event. But as we get further away from the ad, the quality goes down and then it goes back up again, such that if I saw the ad and I installed it 11 days from now, my quality is almost twice that as if I do that in a very narrow time frame. In fact, my quality is actually better than organic. And I would ask everybody on the webinar here, what's the last mobile ad you saw? How about 11 days ago? Do you remember? The reality is after one day, everything starts to look sort of organic. And the question you got to ask yourself here is, which installs do you think the network caused? And which installs do you think would have happened anyway? And ultimately, which installs did you pay for? Well, you paid for all of them. Really, the causal band is probably about 15 minutes or so. And so this is a tool we offer. We call it incremental intent. And it has a bunch of neat clues. Particularly, we'll look at one for Google Ads right now. So anybody who's in mobile right now knows that Google Ads, that Google UAC integration, is YouTube search and display, and it's collapsed into one integration. Well, the good news is in your Kochava data model, you can break that out into YouTube click, YouTube impression, display click, display impression, and then search. And what we'll see is wildly different performance profiles for all of them. Not to spoil, but basically all of it says don't run on Google Display if you can. But search tends to, here we see the profile. Those who reacted very quickly to a search ad tended to have higher quality. As you got further away from the ad action, the quality goes down. We see the exact opposite on display. All of the good quality display customers were miles removed from the ad service, right? And so this is a really quick check that we can run. We use this largely to, actually we catch a lot of fraud this way, but we largely use it to trim attribution windows, because this stuff is typically a lot less causal than folks think. And the good news is in Kochava, there's some tooling you can do to sort of carve around that. So get in touch with your CSM if you're a Kochava customer. So with that, I'm going to stop. How are we with time, Kimberly?
Pretty good. We're 10:44. So, and we do have another question I can put up right now.
Yeah, do it. Let's do it. And I got a couple thoughts for a summary, and then we'll tackle the rest of the question. Yeah, smaller brands, it's actually easier because there's sort of less of a brand effect out there. For anybody who's reading the question, what are sort of the benefits and the awareness that can be brought to the table on a big brand versus a little brand. Big brand issues are typically a lot more challenging around sort of that data cleanliness issue. Oh, we're sending direct mail, we're running out of home, we've got CTV ads, we've got in-store signage. And if you could wave your magic wand, you'd want to account for all of it. If you're a small brand, you really don't have much brand equity built up yet. And so everything is sort of incremental. You're at a really great spot to test, right? Because any ad spend that's worth a damn, you should be able to capture a pop off of. That gets harder as you get bigger. All right, in summary. Oh, we got another question.
Sorry, I jumped another one in there real quick.
Yeah, so annualized numbers, that's tough. It's sort of, there isn't a one size that fits all. It has to do with seasonality. You have to account for seasonality in your brand. Quarterly checks, if you're not doing anything else, at least a quarterly check to understand seasonality differences by quarter to start to get there as a starting point. If you're a retailer, you're probably doing 40% of your demand between like October and Christmas. And so you'd overweight that. And so annual reads are a little tougher to maintain. Not to say that there isn't clues that can be had on an ongoing basis, but it sort of gets to my summary slide. There's no perfect solution. We went through a lot of the challenges with holdouts. There's lots of missed opportunities. There's lots of skewed data. Serve time can be problematic. And so generally, if you talk to more sophisticated modelers, they'll lean on a modeled solution, but even that's problematic, right? All models are wrong. Some models are useful, as the saying goes. And so the useful of the model, the useful of the measurement, is it providing actionable insights? And is it providing it in a timeliness enough basis? And what's this going to look like in a future of signal scarcity, right? And so again, we're already seeing it with iOS. We're going to talk about what's happening in Android probably in the next webinar. And so all of the signal, not all of this signal, but much of the signal is going away. And so the path forward or future-proofing this will likely require a few different things. It's going to probably be a modeled approach. It's going to require more input in terms of first-party data. So to the extent that you're not tracking as much and maintaining as much good first-party data as you can be, it's a great time to start. And then ultimately sort of adapting to change, as you're putting up your antenna and you're chatting with partners, data quality, pull the thread on data quality. How do you get to that device? Where's the source of that coming from? How are you doing that? Walk me through your serve time holdout. How are you adjusting the algorithm? Pull the thread. I encourage folks to pull the thread. And so that best fit solution is going to balance accuracy, privacy, the practicality, the operationability of it. The good news is that Kochava is sort of on the forefront here. So watch this space. We've got a lot of solutions. We intend to create a lot more. So with that, questions? I guess, yeah, we can go to the question slide, huh, Kimberly?
Yeah, we have, you have some previously asked questions. I've got another one here from Lee Hunter that we'll put up after that. And then just to the whole audience, we've got about 10 minutes here. If you have additional questions you want to submit to Grant, jump over to the Q&A tab and put them there, and we'll try to get those covered before we run out of time.
Sweet. Yeah, so his first one is how do we measure? We walked through a lot of different ways that we measure incrementality. This notion of running ads all year with no dark periods. So this notion of evergreen measurement. I'll say this, the best solutions I've seen are modeled. And so, again, it's a modeled exercise, but there's been a lot of thought put into this space in terms of a trustworthy, defensible, always on incremental model. Get in touch, there are solutions there. And the solution that's going to be best for you is the one that you can actually operationalize off of. If I could wave a magic wand and say, hey, good news, that ad buy was 7% incremental. That's not terribly helpful unless you have a comparable. Otherwise, it's a data point on an island that is not terribly useful. Next question. I was wondering if Kochava Media Lift can be used for an advertiser who's not using Kochava's RMP. Yeah, hey, great question. I guess I should have said this. Most of these that we've run as Foundry have not been on Kochava clients. To To be honest, it's the data is just sitting here that once you as an advertiser are interested, it's just there. We don't have to go fetch it. It's very easy to do, but most of these we've done have been on the back of non-Kochava clients. We have a data spec out there. It could be found in the Kochava Foundry site in terms of what data would we need. So if anybody who's on the calls, let's say a Singular or a Just or AppsFlyer client, there's a install report that can be run that gets us what we need, or an event report. It's fairly standard. Best practices for running incrementality tests while minimizing negative impact to my business. Care about that opportunity cost. It's sad. I've watched folks sort of go insane trying to understand incremental measurement and trying to create like increasingly large holdout groups to be able to consider insight. I mean, if you got a 50% holdout group, recognize there's 50% of your universe that you're not serving media to that you could be. And so, the first thing I'd say is take a little bit of a Hippocratic oath and say, do no harm. You're a marketer for a reason. And look at options where the opportunity cost is a little bit lighter. And ideally, the hard cost is a little bit lighter too. Would you recommend measuring incrementality on your own or with a third-party company or somewhere in between? Hey, I always recommend measure your own. You're the one with the checkbook. It's on you, right? I'll go a little further down the spectrum. I do trust Kochava because we've got no skin in this game other than to just tell the truth, right? And so third parties can be trustworthy. I would be a little bit skeptical if it's measurement provided by the folks running the media. Not because the methodology is wrong. All methodology is wrong to some extent, but the incentives are certainly might be a little bit different. So to the extent that you can build your own or you have a solution that works for you in-house, to me, that's the gold ring. The good news is we can help you get there as well. So, trusted third parties, there's quite a few of us out there. There's some pretty good offering. Last one, how are advertisers operationalize the results of incrementality tests? Yeah, so it's a pretty wide spectrum. I'll say where we are on a handful of clients. So there's a handful of clients where we've been doing ongoing lift and causal and contribution measurement for. And so the exercise there is, can we generate a coefficient fast enough such that we can pipe it into their BI tooling? Meaning, can we actually create a coefficient to operationalize? Again, it's a modeled exercise, meaning we are placing a bet at, let's say, 3 days after we see an install that this is actually an accretive install. And so we're doing some extrapolation there, but we're constantly running these back tests to make sure we're right. And so what we're doing is we're helping brands place bets very early through lots of modeling. And so, it's a spectrum of how good of an answer do you want versus how fast of an answer do you want? And is it applying to most of where my media spend is? And so that's sort of my criteria on thinking through this stuff. But we're seeing it operationalized in a lot more ways. A lot of our effort here over the next couple of months is going to be how can we turn this crank faster? Because if it takes us 10 days to create an insight, holy moly, what if we sped that up to 2? And what if we had it just sort of always listening? And so that's what we're building towards now. All right, Kimberly, I think I went a little over. Thanks everybody for who's still here. I'm good to keep going till the top of the hour if we have any other questions.
Yeah, we still have a couple minutes here. And I've got one that I will post here from Lee Hunter.
Yeah. Yeah, Lee, you're going to hear a lot about this. I'll tell you how we do it. So we have a notion called a primary householding model. And so within that publisher suite environment that we created, we have publishers serving their first party data, which is what's the device this was served on and what's the IP address, which is largely a home IP address. Separately, let's say you're a Kochava client, we have alike data on your iOS and Android record, right? As well as any other sort of CTV we're listening to in the household. And so from that and the consented data that we have access to, we build a model to say, well, if we see one device had an opportunity to be exposed, let's grab all the other devices that could possibly have conversions. And we'll do the same thing on the conversion side, is we'll say, what are the other devices that can be associated? And so the mileage sort of varies depending upon where you are on the earth, but within the US, that primary household model maps from one device to an average of 5.2 other devices in the household. And so as that ad is shown on the CTV device, we can make a very tight association to the mobile device that's sitting on the couch. That's how we do it.
I think that's it for our questions for now. If anybody has any last minute items, please feel free to drop them in there. Any last thoughts, Grant, before we kind of do closing out?
No, hey, thank everybody for your time, for sticking it out. Hopefully it was fun and informative. Also, we're taking recommendations for the next one. Right now, we're sort of thinking Android Privacy Sandbox and what that's all going to mean. But, you know, we'll certainly take requests.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you to everyone for participating today. Love that you were interactive and asked questions. This format, this Open Mic Insights format, is a webinar series that we've been doing with Grant from Kochava Foundry, our strategic services arm. We have another one coming up on Wednesday, March 27th, and would love to see you all there. If you follow Kochava on LinkedIn, you will see information about that, but you also probably have received emails from the GM of Foundry, who is Seth Samuels. So if you have any additional questions or follow-ups, please feel free to reach out to him, and we'll make sure you're invited to the next webinar. So with that, we will close it out. Thank you all so much for your time, and thanks, Grant, for the presentation.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Chat soon.